It worked.
You're the first one it's worked for.
Go figure.
I don't understand how this is it's so confusing.
It really is.
It really is genuinely confusing, and I'm just surprised at how hard it is for Google. If Google can't do it, what hope do the rest of us have?
I know, because there's an open referral assembly that you're there too. Oh, it's delayed. No, you're real time.
I'm real time.
Oh, this is confusing now.
Okay.
So it looks like there's an assembly that's being broadcast.
This is it, yeah.
Well, no, but me talking to you right now is the Hangout.
Okay, yeah.
So there appears to be two different things.
I think you're in the Hangout, and
I'm in the Hangout now.
The Hangout is being broadcast.
And I'm watching the broadcast. It's about a minute delayed.
And you can see yourself talking to me in the broadcast.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. So I guess you can turn that off, and we'll just wait to see if people can get into here.
Yes.
Hello, people. Come join us. I see there are 4 viewers, but they're viewing, I guess.
Yeah,
they're not hanging out.
They're watching the broadcast, which it's somewhere in Google Plus.
Yeah, we want y'all in the mix. Come on, get in. You there? I see you. I don't see you. I'm assuming you're out there.
It was that last thing you sent out. I guess you sent it to everybody at Hangs Out on Air.
Right, but if they're looking at the page, the Open Referral Assembly event page, there should be an option to join. Or maybe people just want to watch. Well, Dale, if it's just you and me and they're watching, you and I are gonna do this. It's just gonna be you and me. Mono with various, mono and mana out there.
You said there were 12 people signed up. Hold on.
Here we go.
Yeah.
Here we go.
I think they'll show up.
There they are. Great.
Yeah.
I see Susie and I see Devin. I can hear Susie. Susie, give me a sense of there was a little bit of delay. Were you watching but not joined? I just want to know what people were doing. I want to understand what this is.
Yeah, so I thought this had all been set up and it wasn't. So I just had to get it set up on my laptop at home.
Oh, okay. All right.
My bad. Sorry.
That's all right. I just wanted to make sure. I just wanted to check because it seems to be confusing for folks, and I want to make sure that we have people in, and it seems like we have people watching but not in, and we're just going to give it a couple more minutes, and then we'll just get started.
Cool. All right, then I'm going to take this opportunity to get something else to drink. I'll be right back.
Great. Devin, can you hear us?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Great.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there was a sequencing issue where like the invite to watch the Hangout came before the invite to join the Hangout.
Yes, that's what happened.
So confusing. And then how did you eventually join? Was it from the invite that invited you to join, or was it from the Hangout page?
There was an invite to join the video call.
And so if you're on the Hangout page, that's not working?
If you're on the Hangout page, you're watching.
You can just watch. Ugh. Okay, let me see who else I want to invite. All right, so I'll try to add a couple more people who I'd like to have on the call.
I'm gonna go get a drink as well. And I'll leave this.
Yeah, everybody go get drinks. Eric. I see Eric, Tom Pollock, Sophia. Okay. All right, we got a couple more. Sophia, all right. Great. Good morning. Okay. So the idea of this is that everybody on the call has had a chance to read up to some extent the documentation that I've been sending around, especially the documentation regarding the local teams and the proposal for the working group. Has everyone? I'm going to switch over to Google Drive and see if you all see this because I've brought those documents up. So when I click this, let me know if you're able to see the documents on the screen. Do you see a Google Drive window?
Yes.
Okay. And do you see there's a local team structure document, and I noticed that there's some language that I have to get in there and change. That's good to see. And I won't keep this up on our screen so we can, but I want to make sure that everybody's able to refer to it so we know what we're talking about. Dale, I think you're muted. Are you talking? Dale, you're muted.
Sorry. Sorry. Did you want to try the screen share or just keep them separate as a document?
Well, I think we can maybe switch into the document if we need to. I would like to maybe leave space for people's heads.
Gotcha.
And I just want to make sure that you all know what documents I'm referring to, and that you have access to those documents and you're able to at least see them on your own screens, even if not through the Hangout. Is that correct?
Got it. Okay.
Okay. Great. So in one more minute, I'm just going to I'll introduce myself. I'll let you all introduce yourselves, and then we're going to walk through the documents. Great. Okay, so y'all know me. I'm Greg, organizing lead for this initiative. And but some of you all have not yet met each other, and so I'm excited to have you all face-to-face somewhat. And we're going to go down the line left from my head, which is Susie on my screen. Susie, can you introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Susie Cambria. I work in the Office of the Deputy Mayor for Health and Human Services and have started leading what we're referring to as the 211 Improvement Project. And our goal is to focus on improving the District of Columbia's 211 system, paying most attention to government work, but I've worked closely with Greg for a long time, and so also working on the community side to get all the community resources in the platform Greg has developed. So that's me.
Okay. And Sophia, I see you next. Sophia.
Sorry, it's taking a while to unmute. Yeah, I'm with the Ohana team and working on. Hi, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah, great. I'm on the Ohana team, working on the open referral standard stuff. Looking at translation between other systems, the 211 iCarol stuff, plus anybody else's.
All right, Devin.
Hi, my name is Devin. I work with NYC Prepared and Serapis, but NYC Prepared is a kind of a coalition of organizations active in the Sandy disaster response who deploy open source software solutions to kind of like help the community meet its needs, like the relief community and the emerging like resilience efforts. So there isn't in New York City a 211 system at all, which is there's a history about that, like how that happened, but which makes it difficult for kind of like the relief community to organize all of the various services that are accessible to survivors of the storm and the case managers who need to make referrals on their behalf. So so we've been working on standardizing that data. We've used a lot of the open referral materials to do that, and hopefully we'll have our Ohana deployment up in the next few days. And in general, we're very much interested in seeing the disaster relief community, the recovery community, utilizing open data standards, and maybe bringing 2-in-1 style services to New York City.
Great. And Dale.
Hi, Dale Fitch. I'm at the University of Missouri School of Social Work. I do research on information systems and human services and have worked on some 2-in-1 implementations and generally examine data issues between agencies.
Great. So I can sort of walk us through the proposals that we've put out there, as well as make some specific notes that I already shared via email about recent changes to the design, mostly just little tweaks. Before I get started, or as I'm going through, I'd like y'all to essentially identify your questions. And you can do that by, let's start, there is a question and answer app, but for right now, let's start by adding them into the chat box that you all see on the side of the screen. Got it? We good?
Yep.
Eric, you just joined us. Do you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Oh, hi. I'm Eric Yan. Have a crappy connection, as you can probably tell. I'm a human services data integration consultant living in St. Petersburg, Florida. I work a lot with HUD, HMIS programs, a little bit with AIRS here and there, and with some health integrations. So happy to help out wherever I can.
Okay, great. So let me see if I can give a quick overview of the process and its two different levels. Note how that process has changed a little bit. Answer some questions and figure out. And then we can, if we have time, talk a little bit about where things go from here. So basically, we are going to have sort of two levels of work happening concurrently. We're going to have local teams on the ground trying to implement the means for interoperability between different community resource directory systems to enable people to exchange directory data in a way that helps them provide services or refer people to services on the ground. And so we have local teams who are going to be figuring out what is it that we want to do when we say that, what do we mean? And we have organizers helping those local teams in DC and San Francisco. And the teams themselves consist primarily of stakeholders, community stakeholders, who we're currently designating as organizations that make referrals to people in need on a day-to-day basis, and or groups in a community who are willing to host user groups who are going to essentially try to figure out how to connect people to services using this technology. There are other players in the network around local teams, such as governments, vendors, and other resource directory providers, and they are essentially partners the local teams will be figuring out like for each individual stakeholder, what is our objective and how do we meet those needs, and then collectively they're going to be evaluating how this sort of system of systems works for them and making, researching, proposing, and evaluating the means to sustain these systems over time. In other words, at the local level, questions such as how are we going to actually maintain this data, how are we going to validate it, coordinate the resources to do so, those are open questions that they're actually working to answer through the course of their work. And they're using, along the way, the model for this exchange that we developed through this working group. At this, we're calling it sort of essentially a global level. We'll have a working group that's evaluating the existing artifacts, developing a lowest common denominator vocabulary, a sort of minimal viable vocabulary, and the associated tools, specifications, and so on that they think the local teams are going to need in order to do their work. And they're doing that evaluation and that revision and so on based on the stories that we're getting out of the local teams about what it is that they want to do. And we're going to go through a cycle of design, implementation, evaluation, and we will then reiterate that cycle based on the feedback that we get over the course of the pilot. And we've opened the floor to nominations for this working group. And I'm hoping to see about 7 people in it, representing subject matter specialists, people who work with vendors who provide the platforms, people who work with the institutions that provide the service of resource directory data, and also hopefully at least a couple people who have been involved in standards development before, and who will be able to sort of help balance the needs of the local teams versus the prerogatives of developing a model that's actually going to work for everyone. So that's an overview. I can talk a little bit about what's actually changed in that frame over the last couple of weeks based on the feedback that we've gotten. Really briefly, we were originally calling it a standards table, but folks made the compelling point that though the standard is a new standard is what we eventually hope to achieve, right now we're actually just piloting a model. So we've stepped back from saying we're developing a standard because obviously we're developing something that we eventually hope to become a standard, but for right now we're just going to call it a model, and we're going to say that instead of a standards table, we're going to have a working group developing that model. And other changes, originally we identified 3 different existing bodies of standards that we wanted to align with. The existing 211 AIRS standards, the AIRS XSD, and the Google schema, which is now a part of the W3C. Those were 2 of the points that we wanted to establish something that was interoperable with. And we also identified the National Information Exchange model as, in the long run, something that we want to establish compatibility with based on what we've heard from our subject matter specialists. But one thing that we've clarified is that our objective right now is to develop something that's actually going to work for those local teams. And something like establishing compatibility with the National Information Exchange model may be a part of our longer-term vision. We may want people, at the table who are thinking about how to get there, but it's not necessarily a prerogative for this cycle, this first cycle. And the other change that we made, and we'll be able to discuss all these, I'm just sort of quickly reviewing them. We had originally 3 different user types that we were trying to design for. One was help seeker, anybody who's trying to find a service that meets their need. Another was a service provider, anyone who's trying to help somebody else find a service, presumably in some sort of like formal or semi-formal capacity. And then the third user type was analyst, someone who's trying to evaluate the health of communities, the allocation of resources, that was our sort of triad of users, and we were going to ensure that whatever we develop, it's serving their interests. We've added a fourth based on compelling feedback on this model, which is that database admins, people who actually have to work with these systems, are themselves users, and so we should be designing from their perspective as well. Those were the main things that we sort of clarified based on the original documents, which at this point have been circulating around for about a month or so. So I can take a step back now, having just gone through that, and I'm curious to hear whether each one of you has questions. I think we could go around and you can just sort of identify your question, and I'll sort of sort through what we can answer now versus what sounds like it's actually an open question that might guide future discussion. So unless someone else wants to jump in right away and clarify anything or suggest anything, I think we'll just go down the line. Who wants to go, or we can go, who wants to go first? Anybody want to jump?
I would just say that I have no idea what you just said.
Susie, give us a little bit. Give us a little bit. Come on. Like,
No.
Which part?
You know, it takes me a while to get all this, but so.
Let's see if we can put it into the context of DC. Thank you for that. I appreciate it. So in DC, you are trying to improve the city's 2-on-1 system.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Among other things, that entails improving the data in that 2-on-1 system.
Yes.
Okay. Within your control, potentially, we hope, is producing reliable data about city services.
Yes.
A. B, also in theory within your control, but maybe a little bit more challenging, is getting city government agencies that produce directories to input their data into a common system and use a common system for their directory work. Right?
Yes.
That's correct. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Your third objective is to figure out how to somehow ensure that there are community organizations, data on the services provided by nonprofits and community organizations in your system, somehow. And we have other organizations at the table, community stakeholders, who have that data, who produce it as a matter of course, and who are interested in sharing what they have with other organizations and with the government. You follow me?
Yeah.
Okay. So what we're trying to do is to enable those different groups to share directory data based on each of their needs and interests. So we have to figure out how to get Bread for the City's access database, not just a one-time push of that access database into 2-on-1, but to be able to demonstrate that Bread for the City system can actually talk to either the government system or a system that's talking to the government system.
Mm-hmm. No, I get that. So
okay.
So is everything that you and I have been working on forever what you had said in the introduction?
So the idea, that overview that I just described, you mean?
Yeah.
So yeah, the idea is that we have a stakeholder table in DC with Bread for the City, Public Defender Service, who produces their own resource directory, and let's say the government's 2-on-1 is a stakeholder, right? And they are each saying, through the help of our organizers, they're each going through a process of saying, this is what we want to do to meet our own needs, right? And they're also going through a process of then hearing each of their own needs at a common table and reflecting on like what's right for us as a whole. And those stories about this is what we want to be able to do come to this working group table. And the working group then hears those stories and says, okay, if they want to do this, they're going to need this, this, and that, right? Mm-hmm. And the working group then hands that model and the associated tools over to our local teams.
Okay.
So potentially DC211 gets a specification for how to implement this model for exchanging directory data in iCarol. And we're working in partnership with iCarol, so we can reasonably expect that to happen.
Okay.
Whereas Bread for the City also gets instructions for how to rebuild its database in either Ohana or some other means to be able to communicate with DC211's iCarol implementation of the open referral model.
Okay.
And the local teams are then going to test that, because it's not going to work at first, and we're going to learn from what doesn't work in order to better inform the next version of the model as we trundle forward towards interoperability.
Okay.
How'd I do the second time around?
Oh, I get that.
Oh, okay, so what's your question?
I don't have one. I just didn't
okay.
understand what you said before. Didn't have any questions.
Okay. All right. So the second time around, I nailed it. The first time, I'm going to go back and I'm going to review the tape so I can better understand how to do it in the future. Okay, moving on down the line. Who does have a question?
Actually, Greg. Hey, Greg, can you hear me?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, okay. I wasn't going to ask a question, but I will anyway.
Great.
What does a person do, like Susie, who is one person? I mean, she's part of this group, but she's actually one person out of a larger DC group. How does she communicate to them about what we're trying to do?
How does Susie communicate to the DC group?
Yeah, like she goes back to him and says, you know, I'm working with this group of people that are convened across from the United States. They have this new Ohana API, and they look at her and it's like, okay.
Right.
And so I just wonder if another potential work group model is to have a location where all those people are a part of one of these hangouts.
Good question and good suggestion.
Could I just jump in here, though, Greg? I think I have two responses, right? So the first is that I report to the government and contribute in any way helpful on the community side, but we have a community organizer. And will she be joining here, Greg?
Yes.
Okay.
Did you have something else, Susie?
No, I think that's the way we do it, but I agree. And then Jen, our organizer, will herd all the community cats.
That's right. So Dale, first I'll say I think we should think carefully about what are the right ways to interconnect these different threads. But right now, in each of these pilot projects, we have one organizer who's going to be working full time to facilitate these conversations, and they also have support of various kinds guiding that facilitation. They're not on the call now because I didn't ask them to take their time out to sit on it, but maybe I should in the future calls. And those organizers are responsible for bringing each of the stakeholders who want to lead on this to the table, for helping them figure out their own path forward, for facilitating conversations among that group, for reporting back the outcomes of both sort of, individual stakeholders scoping and evaluation and that collective deliberation. They'll be reporting back to us, and then also sort of translating whatever it is that we're saying into language that they're going to understand on the ground. And I think we can explore various ways to have the core, these assemblies. I'd like to be open for anybody to check in and have substantive discussion about what we're doing. But maybe there's also the cause for of the core groups, the people who are working day to day on this might need their own time and place to be able to check in and really get into the nitty gritty. Does that make sense to you?
That makes perfect sense.
Great. Other questions? I'm going to ask you all questions if you don't have enough questions for me. So let's go around. I'm going to prompt y'all. Devin, do you have questions for us?
I mean, I can always come up with lots and lots of questions, but I don't think any.
Okay.
I think we should just get other people to ask questions. If you really need questions,
Okay.
I'll focus on.
If any of the questions swirling around in your head seem like they're especially constructive for this point in time and for this group, you go ahead and chime in. Or you can ask questions for others, right?
Yeah, I mean, so in the emergency management field, I guess it's like from my perspective, there's kind of a very specific set of services that we're interested in making available, and I think that that's true in any type of disaster. That there's kind of like a specific segmentation of services and a specific taxonomy that you could build out massive taxonomies, but depending on what incident took place, certain terms are going to be more relevant than other ones. I think in New York we're in a strange situation where we don't have a 2-on-1. The United Way is not active in relief work here and isn't coordinating the community. But I guess the question is how is the segmentation going to take place when it comes to you have local segmentation, various areas have their own 2-on-1s, then you have topic specific segmentation. We're doing disaster relief stuff. I'm sure there are people who are experts in child welfare and they're experts in healthcare, etc. How those seem like two different types of segmentation: the local segmentation and the topic-specific segmentation, or the theme-based segmentation of people who need to sit together and figure out what a configuration would look like for them, what the best configuration would look like for them. So I don't know, how do you see that taking place? And maybe we're an outlier because we're really looking at it from the perspective of a 2-on-1 style system for our emergency management scenario specifically. So maybe we're not even supposed to really be, we're not a primary user type or user class.
So, does anybody else want to ask questions of Devin or try to rephrase that or sort of post their own question onto that before I try to respond a little bit?
I had a question for Devin. Since I've noticed New York City has, it seems to have a very active 311. Is that your impression as well? And is 311 kind of filling the void that in New York City that 211 doesn't deliver?
No, in New York, 311 won't make a referral to a nonprofit. So 311 will only make a referral to a government organization. If you call with Sandy-related needs, they'll forward you on to the disaster case management helpline run by Catholic Charities, which is more about placing people making sure people have a case manager, and then that case manager working with that person to access the resources, and not what I imagine a traditional INR services.
Okay, thanks.
And I think that's an anomaly. I think that's a problem. I think that wasn't intended to happen. I think this is a bloom. Everyone I talk to about this. I mean, it's amazing in New York. People don't even know what 211 is. But a lot of the people who I talk to about this, who do know, basically say that this was supposed to happen under Bloomberg, but then the 311, 211 stuff got weirdly political, and then it never moved.
And this is Sophia. I have a question. Mainly, my experience, I helped out a little bit on the Sandy recovery stuff, and what they were trying to do was essentially they were receiving a lot of resources. People were doing donations through Amazon for water or whatever. and part of the problem that they had was that they were sending resources to these temporary places that were like a church or a senior care center, and they wanted to be able to direct people to where the resources were. Is that some of the use case that you're thinking of in emergency management?
Yeah, I mean, we're like this is just like a small part of the work that we do, and it's just kind of like a need that has been identified, and so we're trying to solve it. I mean, when it comes to like fulfilling the delivery of like emergency supplies, yeah, like we're trying to do that stuff. We're not trying to do that through a 2-in-1 framework particularly. We have some software that the International Red Cross uses to kind of manage that type of information, requests, inventory, facilities, things like that. And like ideally, I'd love to be incorporating services into that system, which is called Sahana Eden, so that organizations could manage all of that information. But this is more of a quick and dirty, maybe not quick and dirty, but quick cleaning of basically moving the information from a lot of the resource PDFs that are floating around, produced by FEMA and other organizations, turning it into data, importing it into an Ohana so they can be searched online easily, as opposed to it just floating.
Yeah, I mean, it's possible to do that kind of stuff. You can automate it. There are services called Captricity that would pull out the data from the PDFs and be able, you'll have to write something to structure that data to put it into Ohana, but that's pretty doable. Where we've taken Ohana so far is that we're getting to the point where it's just a standalone thing where you can actually just deploy it on a server or on a single computer, and it'll just build up there. Before, it was very dependent upon external sources, external databases that ran on services. So the way this next iteration of Ohana is going to be running on Postgres, and so we should be able to just ingest data that you're bringing in and then be able to serve that out through the interface.
Yeah, and right now I've got a Ruby guy deploying the various apps. So hopefully in the next few days I'll be able to play with whatever's documented on the GitHub now.
Okay, great.
But yeah, I mean the information that's organized in these PDFs is some of it's paragraphs, some of it it's all formatted differently.
Yeah.
It's not like I wish it were I wish it were tables.
Yeah, no, it might be a manual process to be able to do that. I mean, I use stuff like Tabula and Tika quite a bit to extract stuff out of PDFs.
Yeah, and the people we're working with are like the FEMA people who are managing this data are super excited about us doing this so that the information can be more crowdsourced. Like I said, like they don't traditionally do this because usually there's a 2-in-1 system that's going to organize this information for them. So they kind of just they're doing it because no one else is, and so we're trained into a database because no one else is.
Okay.
That's kind of our orientation to the matter.
So first of all, Neil just joined us, I think. Neil, can you hear us? Can we hear you?
I can. Sorry I'm late, guys. I had something else.
No worries. So let me see if I can wrap up some of what Devin was saying, and then I'll kick it to you, Neil. So Devin, if I can give it a try, I think I see two different questions here for your particular case. One is as you're developing something that meets your own particular needs, which are very focused on emergency, recovery resources, disaster response, that sort of thing, for your particular community in New York recovering from Sandy. The question is how to essentially sort out there is a question about how to sort out the particular needs of that particular use case from the information that we need to develop a model that works across most, if not all, use cases. And then there's also a sort of contingent. There's a question in conjunction with that, in as much as if you're actually going to get to work starting to use our model, potentially even use Ohana, what is your role vis-a-vis this process that I'm proposing in terms of local teams? Do you essentially constitute a local team if you have community stakeholders and a platform and you're testing it and figuring out what works and what doesn't? How's that framing of your two questions? Or is that appropriate framing?
Yeah, and I'd say that was appropriate, and I guess I would add, is there going to be some type of topical or like theme-based discussion? Like how are we going to figure out these taxonomies? And like then that the schema works for various use cases. Is there going to be a theme-based, like, the child health professional, the child care professionals or whatever, and the healthcare professionals and the emergency management professionals? Is there going to be is there going to be is there an idea for like how that would work?
Yeah.
Like that, or if it's even going to be approached that way.
So for here and now, I think we just hold these as open questions. I think that that sounds pretty valid, and I'm not necessarily trying to be the one to make that decision so much as facilitate conversations around them so that we can try different ways to address them. But I will make note of, I meant to designate a note taker at the top of this, and I'm just going to have to make note that those two questions came out as a particular instance. In the meantime, let's move on and hear from others about other questions. I don't think we've talked to Eric yet. Eric, do you have questions for us?
No, I just have a general question, I guess, for moving forward, which is how this fits in with the existing 211s and their existing capabilities and that sort of thing in the short term. So not asking for an answer, but just something to think about, given what that they don't have open data, given that they don't even have a common API, what can we do? How can we start moving this forward so that they can be a part of it? And just a general thing to think about. I know Dale and you are always thinking about this, but definitely that's big on my mind. And then the other thing is, looking at making this crawlable for Google. I often think that another approach could be that it would be more self-sustaining, where we could post link data that would be internally searchable. So I'm wondering, long term, how we can get to a point where this world where you'll be able to inspect some INR data and be led to other data sets in the immediate area through link data, and also to government resources and non-INRs through that same set of linkages. That's really all what's on my mind right now.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. So briefly to your first question, and I think we can actually bring this to Neil next and maybe dig a little deeper. Our pilot projects have 211s at the table in both cases, and those 211s are going to be engaged just like the other stakeholders in figuring out what kind of interoperability meets their needs and is possible. And the idea is that we're going to test, reiterate, test again, and demonstrate viable means over the course of the pilot. That presumably, if they work for a couple of 211s as we go, we'll be able to demonstrate that they can work for other 211s, and we'll have others joining up, and it can sort of take off from there. But it's an important question to keep in mind as we move forward. Neil.
Greetings. Yeah, and Greg and I we saw each other this week at the San Francisco session, and Eric, we discussed some of the same things. And from our point of view, and for those who don't know me, I'm the director of services for iCarol. We're an INR software provider. We've got a good chunk of the 211s in North America who use our system, so we're being client responsive for our clients who say we want to do this and we want to engage and open up our data more. we say, all right, let's figure out how to do this, and we've got a couple of ways to go, actually many ways to go, one of which is our own API, which is very complex and very in line with the ERA standards and deployed and used and documented, and that's certainly a way to go. And the other, and the reason for my participation in this is the contributing to and evolving the open referral standard as an opportunity to open up the data to entities that might not be as sophisticated, probably aren't as sophisticated as 211s, who are the far end of the spectrum in complexity in terms of what they need. And the other end of the spectrum, Greg had provided a number of examples, and 211 in San Francisco also added to these entities that are really pretty simplistic compared to the 211s in terms of their needs for a data system. And so the challenge for this team really is, how do we figure out, for those 211s who do want to open up their data, how do we figure out how to get that data to travel in a way that's consumable by those third parties? And the glory of the ERA standards are awesome, but they might just be too much for those third parties. So I think that's probably the heart of the technical issue this team needs to reconcile, is how to thread that needle and keep everyone's interest preserved.
And do you have any questions for us based on that initial understanding and analysis?
So yeah, and Greg and I chatted, so he's got a little bit of a little more flavor of where my brain is, but some of my questions are, will be in the definition of the data models and the APIs themselves, the schema. How much complexity is the open referral team wanting to put into them? How much is deemed to be appropriate for these other third parties? And those are open questions, and I think until we get into pilot projects, perhaps no one knows those answers. But so that's a main question I have, and Greg, that's why just before we parted, I was asking how much malleability is there still in the Ohana API, and you seem to indicate there's plenty. So I think then that just opens us all up to examining the use cases and figuring out how much Ohana changes based on the needs of the pilot projects and the third parties that will be consuming it. So I don't think that's something that will be resolved today, but that's certainly a big area that I think this team needs to explore. Mm-hmm. Another one is around two-way transmission of data, right? To what degree does data come back in? And I've had a lot of chats with 211 San Francisco folks. I say San Francisco, they actually cover 5 counties in this area. But they would like data to come back to them, but that opens a lot of questions, technical questions, but also business questions for them, because that data will be structured differently, potentially. It may violate their inclusion policies. They're very particular about the types of entities they let into their data. How do we put safeguards, technical safeguards in place to assure that any data flowing back into their system adheres to their business requirements as well? This is the second area. And, Greg, something I wanted to explore with you that you mentioned in the assembly earlier in the week was one of the barriers to using the ERA's taxonomy was their licensing. And there may be other barriers too, but I was curious if you had gone a little deeper with those guys to see if they might consider alternate licensing models that would be more in accord with this open initiative. I have not, but I just wondered, they don't really charge very much for the taxonomy usage. It's measured in a couple $100s per year, and that shouldn't be a barrier for most people, but maybe it is, or maybe it's simply the fact that it is, it's not an open license, and that might be your stumbling block. I just wanted to explore that a little bit more with you.
Yeah. So the issue of the taxonomy, I think, is one of the trickier ones we're going to face. And in my experience, there's actually, I've found very little agreement. Even among people who are generally in agreement, they don't even agree among, at least they're not using the same language to describe this situation. And so I'm looking at the challenge of the taxonomy as one we're just going to have to discover as we go. And the case has been made that we can establish an information exchange, the means to exchange information in some minimally viable way without making any kind of, without locking in people to any one particular taxonomy. And I think others have made a compelling case, especially Dale, who's on the line right now, that in the long run, some sort of viable solution is going to require some means of applying, presumably, the Ayres taxonomy, which very well may entail a change of license, which is not something that we can control, although I think it's something that's being considered based on what I've heard from 211 LA County. But it's not clear what that would entail. Or it could entail the development of a community, a community-driven tax controlled vocabulary, such as something like open eligibility, with the means to crosswalk one to the other. And right now, for this first cycle, because we're just really trying to do some things and learn from them in order to better understand the nature of these challenges and the ways that we can work together. I think this is just going to be an open question. We're going to go in with what we have and try to make it work and learn from what doesn't. And through the course of that conversation, we may be in a better position to understand what each of us means when we're talking about some of this stuff, and what could be done in order to move us closer to the goal of interoperability. So that's my sort of winding non-answer to the question of the taxonomy. And I think your other question, which I heard to be, what are the criteria for things like inclusion and exclusion for the open referral model? To what extent does it reflect will it reflect the complexity of the world as 211 sees it versus versus much more sort of simple cases? And to be clear, the framing that we've laid out for this first cycle of the working group is going to bring various specialists and perspectives into the mix, have them react to the case scenarios that are coming from the local teams. People are going to be able to make their proposals. This is what I think, or so on and so forth. And Sophia is the lead, and Sophia is going to do her best at synthesizing that input into a model. So we have essentially a structure that ensures that people can have their voices heard, and yet there's still going to be decisions made at the end of the day that can be evaluated and tested, and therefore tested. So we might want to hear from Sophia a little bit about her criteria as we head into that process. We're going to have to. There's a balance that we're striking between establishing clear boundaries and focus, and enabling new discoveries to inform our perspective as we go through. So, Sophia, do you want to respond to something we heard? Anything you heard from Neil or Dale? Yeah.
Sure thing. In terms of taxonomy, I mean, in this first iteration, what we really want to do is to nail down just the language, so that our terms all match up. And we have very similar notions. I've been looking at stuff that's coming out of iCarol. They structure the data differently, but they have very similar types of elements that are in the data, and I think those are common elements. So this first iteration, we're just going to work on building out a vocabulary that we can all agree to, that we can describe what an organization is, we can describe what a service is, we can describe a location. On the following iterations, we'll start looking at taxonomy. So in terms of standards development, we'll build a standard based around this controlled vocabulary of things that describe services. After that, we'll start looking at specific profiles of the standard. I mean, that profile could be a 211 profile. It can be an open eligibility profile. It can be a profile just specific to emergency management. I mean, so what we're looking at, what I tend to look at the process is that we have this base of a controlled vocabulary, and on top of that, we'll have an overlay of different types of profiles that represent specific domains. So that's kind of the way I'm seeing and approaching it. So for this first iteration, basically, let's just get agreement on the terms and languages, and then we'll work out, a general relationship between these things that we can agree that, a service can be inside a site or a location, or location can have multiple services. We'll have general agreement on those types of, larger types of relations between these types of data elements in the standard. So that's kind of how I want to approach it for right now, pushing off aside the question of taxonomy. I know we'll eventually get it, and I think what's interesting to me is just it's very definite we can go ahead and get a copy of and license a copy of 211, and of errors. That's probably what we should do, but not in this current iteration. We probably might want to tackle that next, since 211 seems to be one of the it has largest deployment for these types of services. But ultimately, we just want to get a good vocabulary going for this iteration, and then we'll start looking at the different types of profiles that would be overlaid on top of the standard.
All right, that's intriguing, Sophia, because one of the questions I had this week was, the composition of the working group and the pilot projects might heavily influence the standards. If you have someone who's heavily in homeless shelters, or heavily in emergency management, or in the medical profession, right, that could completely pull the standard and the data structure and the fields in a direction that's medically intensive. So it sounds like you've got a notion for having sort of layers or partitions about how you use the data structures, so that there's kind of a generic core underneath, and then it can be repurposed for kind of vertical purposes.
Exactly. I mean, I tend to call these specific instances domains. In essence, there's a community of interest around that particular domain that's going to be building, that will build out, a specific type of thing. So if you want hospitals to interchange information, there could be a profile just specifically for that. I'm borrowing heavily from the idea of being able to apply different XML schemas on top of a base. I'm going to say the O word, ontology, and being able to put those profiles or schemas on top of that and use the data in a way that's interchangeable between communities of interest, internally and possibly between other communities of interest.
Neat kind of inheritance pattern. It's interesting.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So we are at the top of the hour, 3 o'clock. Tom just joined us. He was a little late. And we might have just lost Sophia somehow. So I don't necessarily I don't want to keep us far past 3. Although we could keep talking if some people want to stay on and keep talking a little bit. But let's have us go around. If you have any final comments, questions for next time, or for the immediate aftermath of this conversation. If there's something that you'd like to stay on the line and chat about with a little bit, just to wrap up, let us know. And Tom, unfortunately, we're going to just get to have you say hi right as we all say goodbye, but I'd be happy to check in with you after this is over.
That'd be great.
All right.
Hi, everybody.
This is Tom Pollock of the Urban Institute. We'll give you a chance to introduce yourself. All right, Dale, let's start with you. What'd you hear? What are you thinking? What do you want to leave us with?
I like the incremental approach that Sophia laid out, knowing that there's other larger. I mean, we described a lot of larger environmental issues that everybody's is having to think about, whether it's public, nonprofit, taxonomy, ontology, sector, or whatever. So, but starting out small, doing it incrementally, knowing that there's other things we need to be thinking about.
Great. Devin.
Oh, what was the question? What am I thinking?
Yeah, we're wrapping up. I'm giving you a last chance to have a final thought or a question that you want to hold moving forward.
No, I I look forward to seeing how Ohana works for our use case.
Great. Neil.
I'm good for now.
Great. Sophia, I think you're back with us.
Yeah, I'm fine for now.
Okay. Susie.
I think you're muted.
Susie.
So I just have a lot of questions and notes to myself and for the DC government team.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Great. Tom, go ahead and introduce yourself. I think you've had a chance to read some of this stuff, but go ahead and leave us with any questions you have for us to think about moving forward.
Okay. I don't think I have any specific questions moving forward. I would just mention that I know the Foundation Center has been hard at work on updating its taxonomy. We've been sort of working with them off and on to help them and give them our 2 cents on it. But I would certainly think of including that in your sort of range of resources if you haven't already. Anyway, I'm Tom Pollock. I work with the Center on Nonprofits and Philanthropy at the Urban Institute. We have lots and lots of data on nonprofit organizations and have a good deal of experience with classifying nonprofit organizations. And then I've also been working with around 20 states and communities around the country on our community platform project, which sort of includes a similar sort of resource directory to Ohana, but also provides a whole sort of toolkit of other resources to help nonprofits and communities work more effectively together.
Great. And the community platform, for those on the call, they have an instance in Northern Virginia. They're partnering with nonprofit there. This is bordering DC, so it's very much within, sort of our long-term strategic prerogative to establish interoperability between their platform and whatever model we develop. So they're a sort of near-term frontline stakeholder. So I'd like to hear your feedback on the format of these calls. I'm pretty sure we could do this better and make it more fun, informative, and so on. And I'm looking for your ideas and suggestions as to that. We also haven't yet really settled on a time period. Right now, I'm sort of doing these every other week. We did not have many people signing on to the orientation, but I think it's just because I didn't promote it very well. But I'm really looking to your feedback as to what's gonna work well for us for these kinds of conversations. And in the meantime, I will be following up with folks one-on-one to try to get a sense of who's going to be on the working group, which we'd like to have formed and getting underway as of next week. So thank you all for listening in. It's been great. If you would like to check in with me while I'm here and able to talk in real time, let me know, and I'll give you, we'll take a few more minutes.
I'd be glad to stay online for a few minutes if you have a few.
Great.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Okay, bye all.
Bye, y'all.
Bye.
Cool. Tom, how you doing?
Yeah, very sorry I'm late.
It's all right.
Working on a project with Alaska, of all places. And,
Oh, wow. Is it Anchorage by chance?
No, this is actually electronic. Well, it's not a done deal yet, so don't say anything to anybody, but we're talking to the state about our sort of charity registration system.
Okay. We're broadcasting right now, but I'll go back and make sure that I'll edit. I think I can edit that out.
No, it's just
it's
just interesting that that Alaska it does things. It doesn't necessarily like to work with folks in other parts of the country,
right.
especially in DC.
Yeah. So yeah, things are going well here. I'm curious to hear, your questions, if you have updates or anything like that.
Yeah, I don't think there are any big updates. I know, we had an initial call with with the folks that you know in Albuquerque, and I think the initial call went real well, and then I think they were hoping to have a call today, but times couldn't be coordinated, but it sounds like there will be a follow-up probably in the next couple weeks.
Okay.
With a goal towards syncing up all our systems, and just as kind of you and I had discussed.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I guess so. The bottom line from it seems like we've got two different things, right? I mean, there's the there's the data elements, getting those fixed, and then there's the taxonomy. An API where I set the API for the data elements, that's pretty low-hanging fruit for me, but just like my guy, we don't want to have to build it twice, so the sooner we can get that nailed down, the better. Taxonomy is a little easier to deal with, in terms of having a version 1 and then iterating some versions.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not better building something twice than building it once and getting locked into something.
Small changes are okay, but just looking at the initial draft. I mean, I confess I haven't looked at it in a couple, in a month or two, but it felt like there were, it felt like it was still too loose to really go out and implement. Was my sense, and based on what you were saying, you were still looking at being some months away on it, right?
Well, I think this process that we're convening now is going to go a long way towards developing something that we think is really ready to be used. I don't think we'll get all the way there. I don't know, and also the kinds of changes that might be made are somewhat abstract to me, and so I mean, I think that could mean that you all there's different ways you could participate, right? There's having someone from your network or that community who really understands this stuff being on the working group, advising the development of that model based on those local the case scenarios that are coming from DC and San Francisco. There's actually trying to form a team according to this model that we have, which would specifically mean at least one or two community anchor stakeholders who want to be able to consume data from a shared platform according to their own sort of needs and means. Okay. So essentially those stakeholders are the ones generating the critical feedback. The vendors are implementing and maybe doing some technical translation, but it's those stakeholders are the ones who are saying, this is what we want, and this is what it did or did not do, and what we think about that. And so so that would be a more intensive proposition for participation, right? To actually, because it's an organizing challenge. But any group that brings community stakeholders to the table and says, we're going to implement it in this way, but we have this table sort of evaluating it, they could essentially be giving actionable feedback rather than just sort of input that we're happy to have. But
well, I mean, this is our New Mexico process. I mean, this is what we do.
Yeah, y'all might be. If y'all are there, then it may actually be a small lift, and I think it would be really interesting to be able to have a third team in the mix, as a sort of formal partner in trying to figure this out. And then, of course, the other threshold of participation is a lot lower than potentially both of those, which is just taking a look at what we got, maybe tinkering with it, trying to make it work on your own, generating feedback or asking questions, from more of a informal perspective, right?
Now, what does your DC group look like now?
Well, we're sort of building it, but I have an organizer and an advisory group around her, and it's Bread for the City, Martha's Table. It seems like Lutheran Social Services and Catholic Charities, Public Defender Service, and Criminal Justice Coordinating Council, and then the city government. And there are some others that are expressing interest. but the idea is like she'll be going around to each one of those stakeholders and saying, okay, how do you want your system, either the existing one or some new one that you develop, to talk to this shared system? And she develops that story, and we'll be translating that into technical specifications. And some of those technical specifications will get sorted and sort of shared. Well, maybe they all get shared with the standards group, but some get identified as like, this informs the model, and others may just inform the whatever application or whatever front end or user side system gets developed.
Okay. So you have somebody in place now in DC?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
I would be interested in meeting this person.
Oh yeah. I don't think we've like formally introduced her yet. I only just flew into town on Wednesday, and she's also she's not yet actually getting paid. So, but
okay.
she will be shortly, unless, yeah, she will be shortly. We have a $25,000 pledge from Patty Stonecipher, and I'm trying to get a match for that. So we have a little bit of a supply side, logjam, but I'm not going to hold off or not hire her just because we haven't found that match yet. I'm sure it's going to come. So I'm just like, that's why I'm here in DC getting this off the ground. So.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
Great.
So like I said, I feel like we're certainly moving in parallel paths, and would like to be. I mean, as usual. I mean, I do need funding to move my work forward, but I feel like we've trod a lot of this ground already, and want to help.
What I'm saying to everyone is, we've gotten the resources to bring on these organizers at the local level, and the developers. We have resources at the global level for the modeling and so on. And for others who want to participate and who say, okay, well, we can show this is what we want to do. It's in alignment with the goals of the initiative, and we have these stakeholders, and they sort of meet the criteria for who we want to be at the table. And in those circumstances, I'm able to help groups raise money. And if we can articulate the ask, say this is what we want to be able to do, and this is the resources that we need to be able to do it, I'm relatively confident that we'll be able to find the people to fund. The challenge, despite that confidence, the challenge, as you know, is the delay. Is that it just the funding's out there, but it's like it's that dance of being able to get started in order to demonstrate that we're doing something, and to balance that against the fact that funding just sometimes takes a few months, right? Or even it probably takes a few months at best. And so. So far, I'm just flagging that for folks and being like, I'm confident that in the mid to long run we're going to be able to get the funding we need, but we got to get started, and sometimes that has to happen in conditions that aren't funded. And I'm looking to folks to find their own way through that challenge, although I can help, right? So.
Okay. So. I'm not sure where that leaves us. Like I said, I feel like we're on sort of parallel paths, but I obviously need help like everybody else does moving this forward. So
what I would say is, if you want to talk about Albuquerque or specifically, and based on the existing framework that we've laid out, I think it might be interesting to identify different scenarios from your end that you think, right? Even just as a starting point for discussion. Be like, scenario one, we are watching what's happening and maybe doing some informal ad hoc sort of like experiments alongside. Scenario two, we put someone on the working group and have that person sort of like contributing to this process, but also then advising us in a somewhat more formal capacity. And in order to do that, we're going to need this, this person is going to need to be funded to that extent or whatever. Scenario three, we want to form a local team. We have the community stakeholders at the table, and we sort of frame it like this, and we need these resources to be able to do that, right? So you can come up with those different scenarios. I'm pretty sure we can go to the city, at least in Albuquerque, because we have some, we have some relationships with them through Code for America. It sounds like if we have those scenarios and we can point to the number, I'm assuming the number is actually going to be in the scheme of things relatively low.
Right. Yeah. No. I mean, I confess I have not had a chance to go through all the documents that you've posted, but I mean, where I said it's like I've got a data-focused community organizer, really two of them, working New Mexico now. I mean, this is what they do, and I mean, that's why the meeting happened with Albuquerque, and they just had a meeting, brought in, I don't know, I think they had 30-odd data providers. I mean, this is like everything you're talking about, but already quite frankly at a much larger scale, because they've got a good funding community there. But they're concerned with sustaining the operation. I'm concerned because they're killing me with change requests that that nobody has funding for. I do not want to be undermined by you diverting funds that potentially could go to my project into some other organizer that completely makes things 10 times more complex than they already are. So
well, if you're so there's a lot going on in there, especially that last part, and I'm not trying to build a new competing thing on the ground anyway, right? I'm trying to help people figure out how to more effectively coordinate among existing resources. And so, like, I'll say one little side note, right, which is that we want actual user-driven development, which is not typically how things are done. People talk about it, but it's not how things are typically done. By which I mean, like, typically it's like there's a focus group, or maybe one observation session, and the developer watches, or maybe asks some questions, and then goes and writes it up, and then develops something based on what they interpret. And what we're looking for is a sustained process by which users are like, this is what I think is success, right? And that takes time and effort. And again,
we've been doing this over 2 years. Let me tell you. I mean, oh my God, we are.
Right, and so I guess what I'm saying is, like, I have a particular vision of how that works, but it's somewhat open to sort of interpretation. If you're saying, hey, we've already done that work, we have this framework in place, we want to participate in this way, and if you can frame it as like, we're here and we're doing this and we just want to be a part of this broader conversation without, we may be able to look at that and say, okay, yes, this is a local team that should be sitting at our table, and their work to implement this is going to generate feedback that's going to inform the cyclical process, right? In which case, maybe maybe it's not a matter of starting something new so much as building on what's already there.
Right. I mean, that certainly is my sense. I mean, really, truly. I mean, we've been iterating for well over a year here. So I mean,
So
no doubt it's user driven, and the efforts this team. I mean, it'll take you a couple of years to do the number of iterations, the amount of outreach that that our New Mexico partners have done, to do that in DC. I mean, they've had numerous events with both individual organizations and potential data aggregators, and it's all the things you're talking about, not within your framework. So I
And so, and we want to be flexible about things. So
I don't even think you can be flexible, quite frankly. I mean, it's like I think we're talking about exactly the same kind of thing, right?
Well, I mean, I think we could be talking about things that are similar enough that we're ready to actually align them. So if I actually sent a note to my guy at Albuquerque just checking in with him.
Okay.
And I expect to hear back, but I welcome you to chart a course forward there, and I will, I'll be taking your cues.
Okay. Your guy is what's his name?
Mark Leach.
Right. Yeah, he was on the last call I was on with them.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I guess, yeah, I mean, just please keep me in the loop if there's
Yeah.
anything, we need to know about, so, what you're up to in Albuquerque. I mean, like I said, everything's, very much.
Yeah, I mean, to be totally above board, what I'm up to is Mark contacts Code for America. Code for America puts him in touch with me. I say, have you talked to these other people? He says, no. I said, maybe you should go do that, right? That's what I'm up to.
Right.
And so if we're hearing from you, we've heard from them, and their interests are potentially aligned, and we're doing this work, and it seems aligned with what you're doing. And we want to join these threads, and if you say, but we're going to need this capacity to be able to do so, or whatever it is, then I go to him and I say, hey, they're interested, and they're saying this is what they need to be able to, sort of take these extra steps with us, and I'm pretty sure he'll be able to help get it.
Great. Okay. Well, that sounds wonderful to me. I mean, certainly that'll be music to my partner's ears. I mean,
the
they've got
devil's in
money.
the details, right?
Yeah, but I mean, this is like they're spending real money here. These are people that are,
Yeah. Yeah. So let's see what we can do.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
all right.
That sounds good. And then in terms of DC, I mean, I guess, I appreciate being able to meet your organizer, sooner rather than later.
Okay. Well, I'm here for the next 3 weeks. I'm not sure that we are going to do like a stakeholder gathering or anything, just because I think we're still getting started. Although I'm feeling it out. If people say, yeah, we want to get back together and review the progress, it's that's fine. I'm just mindful that most of what I laid out last time is just still in the process of coming to happen, and I don't necessarily have. Well, I guess I'll say this: we're in the process of saying, having a 1 to 2 page document saying this is what we expect out of lead stakeholders.
Right.
This is what they're putting into the process, and this is what they can expect out of it. I basically described that in our last gathering, but we're going to have a document that's been informed by the organizers and their conversations with stakeholders, and so that may be the next prompt for either a gathering or a series of one-on-one meetings with DC.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Great.
What's happening with United Way? Are you? I went to Mary Ann Floto's meeting a couple weeks ago.
Uh-huh.
I mean.
What happened there?
Oh, it just. I mean, this was sort of her and her partners sort of struggling with, the confluence to try to get specs aligned. I mean, it just sounds like it's a difficult situation that, it's a classic sort of software development issue. I mean, I don't think I wouldn't necessarily blame either party. It's just, one side you had people thinking it looked like one way, and another,
Yeah, I mean, I don't think they knew what they were doing when they asked Confluence to build something, and I don't think Confluence may or may not have understood that what they were building was not going to be useful, but they didn't actually try to make that point heard. So I still asked Mary Ann for drawings of what she thought she was building. Just basic diagrams.
Right.
She said that she had them, or that she'd sent them in a PowerPoint, or that she'd printed them out, but I still have not seen a drawing of what she thought she was doing.
Right. Well, I mean, like you, I'm a big believer in, sort of an iterative process where there are multiple opportunities for feedback, and, sometimes that's very difficult to do in the context of, oh, I got a grant for X dollars and I got to spend it within 12 months, and
especially if you don't write down what it was that you thought you were doing, and you don't have a diagram of it so that other people can see without all the words that are sometimes ambiguous, like what it is that you think you're doing, then how are we going to be able to give iterative feedback? Who knows?
Right.
So I'm not really sure what to.
Yeah.
All I want out of Mary Ann and the United Way of the National Capital Area for the next 6 months is to not undermine what we are trying to do in DC. That's all I want out of them.
I see.
Right, and next year it's a different story, but for right now I just want them to want them to say, our partners in DC are trying to do this thing, and we're looking forward to see what comes out of it, right? If they're ready to come to the table and say, we don't really understand what all this means, but we want to participate and we're ready to learn, right? Like, that's great. Let's have that conversation. But what has been happening is she comes to the table, she says, I don't think you all know what you're doing, or that's basically the message I get. I don't think you all know what you're doing, but also, when she tries to explain what it is that she's doing, she's not actually able to make it clear. So I just need to not say to anybody else or internally that I don't know, some of the things that we've been hearing from some 2-on-1s are like that we're scraping data and trying to sell it, and that we're trying to build a national resource database, like not all of these things that are just basically trying to scare people.
What is, I did just let you go, I did just glance at Clive had posted some comments online that seemed rather negative. I didn't read them exhaustively.
Where?
On your, on your landing page for this work.
Oh, like the public. So there's a Google Doc.
I don't remember where exactly it was.
Okay.
Maybe it was probably the Google Doc. I mean, you must have seen it, right?
So Clive does have a couple of comments in the Google Doc, the public documentation. And I go back and forth with Clive. He's trying to help. I'm going to the AIRS conference in Atlanta.
Oh, cool. Wait, when is that?
June 1st through 4th.
Ah, cool.
Mm-hmm.
Are you doing a session or?
Yeah, I'm going to present. I might even do like a little webinar before the AIRS conference to give people an opportunity to, see me and hear me before the conference. Because my presentation's on like Wednesday, and so I would like to be having constructive conversations before then, right, with people who are at least have some understanding of what we're trying to do. So. Right.
What is your sense about? I mean, at one point I thought you felt like Clive was, 100% on board. His comments seemed less than that.
Clive's in a tricky spot, right? He's
representing the 2-on-1s, and yeah.
So it's not that he's 100% on board. I don't think that would be possible, right?
Okay.
It's more that he is a semi-formal, if not formal, sort of liaison between AIRS and this effort, and he's asking us for clarification, which is important, and providing insight, which is important. And I'm not exactly in a perfect world, our work would be happening within AIRS, and I'm not trying to close that door.
Right.
And I want them to see this effort is, this effort is pursuing their goals, and it's not trying to take their ability to steward, this stuff away from them. But it's also like we can't wait for them to, to see the light. We have to. It's just too urgent for us to let this be the responsibility of a body that's actually hamstrung by all these entrenched interests, right?
Is that how you feel about it? I was like,
Yeah, I mean, there's no technological reason why this problem is not solved already. It's all political and institutional, right?
Wait, what problem?
The problem of data silos, non-interoperable community resource directory systems, right? Like we're long past that point. This technology at this point is 10, 15 years old, right?
But I guess my only suggestion to you is, I mean, have you looked carefully at like their list of data elements, and is there any reason not to simply use their list of data elements instead of trying to recreate it from scratch?
So we're not recreating from scratch. We're developing a model that's based on their list of data elements.
Yeah.
But their list of data elements is designed for a fully functional 2-on-1 system, which has a lot more complexity than most systems want or need.
Right.
And we heard that from their own vendors, right? Yeah.
But a lot of those fields are optional. I mean,
Right.
It's like, honestly, I mean, I'm not using their precise data element list either. But,
Right.
But if I, if I put myself in your shoes and I'm thinking about
Right.
how do I get something that will be
Yeah.
broadly used, and quite frankly, I mean, I give them credit. I mean, they've been doing this for a long time, and I think that was all the gist of Clive's comment.
Right. And our objective is interoperability. That's one of our values, right?
Right.
And so we're not starting from scratch. We're not doing something that's going to be in conflict, right? We're developing a model that can, for which data can move in and out of 2-on-1 format, right? And I think most people would probably agree that in a perfect world, you would have a standard for 2-on-1 systems, which have a very specific and broad and complex mandate.
Right.
And that standard is interoperable with standards that actually can help support much more general or even more specific use cases that aren't within that 2-on-1 context, right?
Right.
And so that's what we're essentially trying to develop. Is not something that would compete with them. It's something that would work with them. But that still and potentially still gives 2-on-1 vendors like some, or a lot of space in which they're offering things that others can't do, or that aren't covered by the standard, right? Which preserves their interests if they're smart enough to be able to act on it.
Right. Okay. Anyway, that was just my 2 cents. I mean,
sure, I appreciate it. Yeah. And again, like, it's easier for me to say that stuff when it all comes down to it. It's like I'm going to need people being like, well, this is what you say you're all about, but when the rubber hits the road, look what's happening over here, right? We need people to be able to point specifically to places where it's like you're doing something that's not interoperable, or you're reinventing the wheel and you don't need to, or whatever it is, right? So I'm not trying to
that's what I'm saying. That. I mean, I don't like, my understanding is their data elements are, freely replicable. You don't need a license to use them. I could be mistaken about that, but I mean, that was.
Well, it's a little ambiguous, but yes. But then the thing is, like, but it's in XML, which not all these systems use, right?
Is that true? I mean, we're just talking about a structure for the schema. That doesn't really matter. I mean,
so far, Sophia is modeling this specification on that structure, so it's not.
Okay.
That's the idea. If it's not interoperable, we haven't done our job.
Right. And then the taxonomy itself.
We're not going to deal with it in this first round, right? It's just like.
Oh, okay.
Clearly, yeah, right. In this first round, I mean, I'll clarify that. In this first round, I'm looking to see how people deal with the problem of the taxonomy, right?
Right.
Like we're saying, in the long run, we think this is going to be necessary. Like many of us think this is going to be necessary in the long run to have the world that we want. But in the short run, we can develop a model that has fields in it for taxonomy code, and the idea is you use what taxonomy code you want.
Right.
Yeah. And in future iterations, when we see what happens when we try to develop this model, without our own control or without an open, controlled vocabulary for people to use, once we've gone through that and seen what happens, it's going to be easier for us to have that conversation about what is the role of taxonomy and all this, and what's our method, right?
Okay.
Because right now it's just everybody's opinion, and on the taxonomy issue especially, like I have not found 2 opinions that are the same.
Right.
So I'm inclined to just basically see how people react to this current state and learn from that, and sort of revisit the conversation once we've actually done the thing and can talk about it with everybody on the same page. So.
Right. Okay.
Cool.
That's a reasonable approach. Okay.
Thanks,
thank
Tom.
you for the update. My apologies for being so late.
No, that's all right. And if you want to talk about Albuquerque and/or Northern Virginia, I'm happy to. I'm in town through the month of May. So I'd be happy to meet up.
We can plan to have coffee or something. I mean, like I said, I feel like, I mean, less so Northern Virginia, quite frankly, because they have less resources. But certainly New Mexico is like, man.
Yeah. And if I can, and I'm also thinking about how our efforts should really be. It should not be DC and San Francisco based, right? We need more perspectives in the mix. So I have an interest in seeing viable teams from outside of this.
Okay. Let me just throw out another idea. I mean, as we talk about it, I mean, the kind of thing that would sell for me is, I mean, the problem, you know, my partners are financially strapped, as am I. But if we said, you know, if I sort of put out a call to my, you know, 20-odd partners and said, you know, we're looking for a couple people that would really take the lead on building out their local, you know, interoperable resource directories, and, you know, in turn, you know, we'd work with Greg to get, you know, an additional, you know, I don't know how much you're paying your DC organizer, but, you know, help foot the bill for somebody to really take this on, you know, work with your team to take this on. And, you know.
So,
I mean, it's like we sort of got the infrastructure to do it, you know, just not the staffing.
So,
and these people have the, you know, they have the contacts with the you know, the human service, or, I mean,
so again, what our organizers in DC and San Francisco are doing are profiling the stakeholders who say we have this system or we have no system and this is what we want. They're profiling that, and then they're turning around and turning that into technical specifications, functional requirements, technical specs, right?
Right.
And that's one thing that they're doing, and the second thing that they're doing is then facilitating the conversations among those stakeholders. It sounds like you all have, I guess there's questions about how to apply that model to your situation, right? Because you have a table of stakeholders sharing a platform, and so it's like, is that the table that we're looking for, or is that essentially one large conglomerate stakeholder, and the helping home in this particular case is another, you know, stakeholder, and you know, then you have partners like United Way 211 or whatever it is. Like we'll have to sort of see essentially a landscape analysis and figure that out, because what I'm hearing is that it sounds like you think you already have the community side infrastructure, and that you already have the capacity that we're talking about to do that profiling and requirements and specifications articulation. In which case, if you say, hey, you know, this is who we have, this is what their objectives are, and you know, we have this capacity, and we need, you know, and this is what we want to be able to do, and this is where our gap is, then I take that and get my contacts with Code for America, and we get on the horn with, you know, the people in the city who want to see it happen, and we say, okay, you know, how do we get that gap? How do we close that gap? So yeah, but
yeah, I mean, do you have are there documents that your organizers are using to do this analysis? I mean, you know, just like different partners are in different places in terms of their, you know, just quite frankly, their ability to do outreach. But the best of them, you know, have those contacts already, or actively doing that kind of outreach. So
yeah, and the other thing is, like, we're not necessarily looking for a huge number of participants, right? Like Bread for the City has like 3 or 4 different people who work at different points in the system, right? One social worker who manages the resource database, you know, a frontline social worker who actually is in charge of the referral process that uses the resource database, a tech guy who can work with, like, rebuilding an infrastructure, and then a sort of manager who can represent the interests of the organization in ensuring that this process is you know, appropriate and non-threatening to other aspects of the organization, right? So they have a team. And that's essentially all they need, right? They're, like, that team is going to do some interviewing of the other people in the organization, of clients, right, based on what, you know, their research process. But our organizer comes into that team and facilitates their process of figuring out whatever it is that they want to do. So it's not like there has to be major outreach. You know, they're essentially pretty close to what they need. In other contexts, if we have an organization that wants to participate, they want a solution, but they don't have that kind of, like, actual pretty serious infrastructure that Bread for the City has. there's going to be the option of, okay, can you find someone who wants to contribute a large amount of volunteer time, who's pretty reliable, who can lead you through that process? Or do you want to identify this as a project that you can find funding for, which may take a while? Or, and we sort of lead them through, essentially the question is, we want to see those stakeholders having teams that are trying to figure out, is this meeting our needs, right? Because the alternative is like, you keep an organization posted and you send them emails and maybe they come to a meeting and then they get a tool and the tool probably doesn't meet their needs, but they're just like, okay, and they probably won't use the tool, right? And we're trying to find a different pattern there. And so you're saying, we have even a handful of organizations who have the infrastructure, who've already been going through this learning process, and we just want to take this model and make these different systems work together. Right, we're already there, and if you can identify what resources you need to actually take this model and work with them according to this sort of cyclical workflow, then once we have that ask clearly identified and the participants saying this is what we want to do, I think we're going to be able to find the funding to support whatever resources you think you need. There's context in there. It's like I'm not expecting. We raised $120,000 in the Bay Area. I don't that's my best guess. That's my best guess for the capacity that we need to have 1+ full-time employee, right? 1 person plus consultants to support that person because they can't figure it all out themselves, and then funding for a gathering, right? Or a series of gatherings, right?
Right.
That budget is could be smaller maybe. But it's also not an intimidating number. That's less than most funders throw at big technology projects, right?
It depends on the size of the community.
Yeah.
I mean.
Well, the Bay Area is actually fucking huge.
No. I'm saying the 120 sounds like modest in San Francisco, but Fargo, North Dakota, different story. I mean,
Although I think to do this right, you probably do need a person on the ground. Giving it their full attention on a day-to-day basis, and so that plus budget to support participation of various kinds, you're going to get to 120 in some kind of metropolitan area pretty quick. Somebody's calling me in, so I got to take this.
Okay.
But thanks for sticking around, and let's talk more.
Okay, sounds good. Take care.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.